Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Aurélie, a lettering artist from the Gold Coast in Australia. I am passionate about helping other creatives improve their lettering skills and also make passive income online. I have many online courses and design resources available, so if you're interested, make sure to check out my website. In this video, I am going to show you how I created this type of filigrees I used in this lettering piece. I actually created this piece for the Typism book 9, and this piece actually got selected. The book will be available very soon, so I'll make sure to leave all of the details in the description as well. And with this artwork in particular, I really wanted to challenge myself to try out something different, and I'll actually be using this artwork as the reference for this tutorial and show you exactly how I created those filigrees, and I'll share with you some of the behind the scene as well on how I created the artwork. So I'll show you exactly how I added and then created those ornaments, and this was entirely done in Procreate using my chalk lettering brushes from my chalk lettering toolkit. You can actually download a free sample brush from this chalk lettering toolkit, as well as a stamp brush that you can use to complete this tutorial. The link is in the description, so make sure you grab that before we begin. Now that you're ready, let's get started. Okay, so the first step is to actually decide the overall composition of your artwork. Like I said, I'm going to show you exactly how I created this piece for the Typism book. So the first thing I did was actually draw some sketches to figure out the overall composition. So when I draw my sketches, that's when I arrange the lettering. So I decide which typeface I'm going to use, where I'm going to position the text, what size it's going to be, and then where I'm going to place the filigrees. So just to give you a bit of context, guys, this was the early sketches. I always sketch on a notebook, not in Procreate. For some reason, I just love pen and paper for that step. So you can see here, I'm simply just drawing the text, then figure out how I'm going to arrange it on the page. For this one, I wanted to experiment with very complex filigrees for this piece. I decided to go with a very symmetrical layout. So you can see that the two words no are actually smaller because they're not as important as the words risk and magic. So this is how I kind of decided to arrange the composition, and then I just played with the lettering here a little bit more, and that's what I photographed and then brought to Procreate. So I just photographed that with my iPhone and then just exported the JPEG in Procreate. So like I said, the first step is to decide on the overall composition of your design. So what kind of shape you want to use, how it is going to be arranged. You have to keep in mind that filigrees are typically made up of delicate interwoven lines, and it's very important to create a sense of balance and harmony when you draw filigrees, I believe. So that's why I went with that symmetrical design. So the first thing I did was create the new canvas, and as you guys know, this was a piece in the Typism book, so they've already provided the format of the artwork. So for this tutorial, guys, you can use any format you would like. This will work at any sizes, but in this instance, I have used the format of the book, which is 13.5 centimeters by 20.5 centimeters. So that was the size of the Typism book, so that's what I went with. So this was the canvas I started with, and the first thing I did was to activate the symmetry guide, and this is going to be very important and very useful when you draw filigrees. So let's go ahead and do that. And the actions, if you go and tap drawing guide, you can then edit your drawing guide, and you've got the symmetry at the bottom right corner. Make sure you select that one. You can change the opacity just so it's a little bit more visible. Just going to click done, and you should have your canvas divided into two sections now. So obviously I'm going to skip the lettering part. This is just a tutorial on how to draw filigrees, but this is what I was working with. I had my lettering all done. Basically what I tried to do with the filigrees was to fill in the empty space. So I wanted to add elements wherever there was an empty space. So if you create a new layer next to your lettering, however you want to do this. You're going to see that if you draw on your canvas, it's only going to draw on one side. If you want to be mirroring your design and make sure it draws on both sides, you actually need to tap on your layer and make sure that the drawing assist is activated. So when you click drawing assist, it's going to indicate that this layer is now assisted. Whatever you're going to draw on the left hand side of your canvas is going to magically appear on the opposite side. It's going to be mirrored, and this is perfect for this type of lettering with very delicate interwoven lines, because it's just going to make everything look more symmetrical, more balanced, and it's also going to save you twice the time, and you're simply going to be drawing on the left hand side and everything's going to be replicated on the second side, so you're literally just saving twice the time. Hopefully by now, guys, you've downloaded your brushes, so you've got your sharp chalk brush and your filigree brush. Here you can go ahead and start stamping your brush on your canvas, whatever size it might be, whatever design you're working with, and just stamping your filigree wherever you think is needed. So for me personally, I know I'm going to place one here, and this is the shape I have used. For this video, I'm just going to hide the lettering so we can just focus on the filigrees. Now I'm going to just make this shape a little bit thicker so it's a little bit easier to work with. So I'm going to create a new layer on top of that stamp, and once again I'm going to activate the drawing assist. I'm going to grab the sharp chalk brush, and here I'm simply just going to make the line a little bit thicker. So just going over the actual stamp, and you'll see that when you use this brush, it's a little bit angled, which is totally fine. It's going to be great for the next step, you'll see, guys, but do your best here to just make it as clean as possible and aim at having the same thickness all the way. This step absolutely doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to add the outlines in a minute, so don't worry if it's not exactly the way you want it to look, but this should give you something like this, and if you've done it correctly, you should have a mirrored version on the other side. Alright, so that's it for the composition. I always recommend when I draw filigrees to have enough space around each form, because then when you add all of the details later on, it's better to leave enough space around it. This is what yours should look like. Alright, now we can move on to the second part, which is about drawing the outlines. So now that you have a general idea of your composition, you can start drawing the outlines of your filigree. And I always recommend starting by drawing the largest shapes first, so the big components, and then add smaller details as you go to kind of fill in the blanks. And here, guys, don't be afraid to experiment, try different things. The more creative you are, the more unique your filigree will be. So let me show you how I did mine. I'm simply going to be working on the same layer here using the same sharp chalk brush. I might make the size a little bit smaller here. All I'm going to be doing here is try to make this shape look more organic and add a few more curls to it. And you'll see here that I don't really follow any rules. I just try to make it as smooth as possible, and I always try and follow the same direction. And if you want to experiment, you can try and add your thing going in different directions as well. When you have like an empty space like that, so this negative space here, you can try and fill that with another loop, another curl, like that. So I usually like to do it like that, so kind of try and fill in the blanks with the curls. And as you can see, I don't know if you can already see me doing that, but if you've done any of my tutorials before, you know that I always draw towards the outside. So I always like make movement that way. So I don't draw like this with my pen. Like I never bring the pen towards me. It's always away from me like that. That's why you might need to rotate your canvas quite a bit for this one. You'll see me do that. Hopefully that will still be easy to see what I'm doing. This process is very intuitive, guys. There is no right or wrong. There is no rules here. You can just kind of just give it shape. Like, this shape is actually already looking a lot nicer. And if you think you've overdone it, feel free to erase anything that you don't like. Again, I want to fill this empty space here, so I'm going to add an extra flourish. Always keeping the same direction with the wrist. Let's tackle this little loop over here. If that still seems impossible and you're struggling a little bit at this stage and you're like, I don't know really how to place those curls, that's where you can use reference images. So that's where you can do a bit of research and have a couple of images next to you just to make sure that what you're drawing is looking like a real filigree. And what I would suggest as well, if this is your very first time doing this, is to just do exactly what I'm doing. So try and replicate exactly the same shape. I'll make sure to leave the shape on the screen so you guys can use that as a reference. But I'm not going to lie to you guys, this is a difficult process. This is not easy. Takes a lot of experimentation, lots of back and forth. So you might have to zoom in, zoom out, undo things that you didn't like if needed. Here, for example, everything is going that way, so that's when I usually like to have a curl going in the opposite direction. I think having things going like different direction is what's going to give it a bit more movement and make it look a bit more dynamic and flowy. And again, if you want to fill in an empty space, you just add a little loop inside like that. So when I have a shape like this, it's not fully perfect just yet. So that's when I kind of zoom out and decide, okay, well here, this is not looking exactly the way I want. So that's when I'm adding elements or I'm like refining some of the shapes that I've already got on my canvas. And that's when you can use your eraser as well to kind of make it a little bit more sharp and make the ends a bit more pointy. Okay, so far I'm happy with that. Obviously I could go on forever, make sure I refine everything, but I want to keep this tutorial nice and short, so I'll give you the actual technique. But with this, at this stage, you guys could spend quite a lot of time refining this shape until you're happy with it. Okay, so now let's move on to the third step, which is about shading. So once you're happy with the outlines of your filigree, that's when we can start shading it in. We use the chalk brush to fill in the entire shape, and we're going to use the same brush, the same chalk brush as an eraser. And we're going to start adding some shadows to give our filigree a sense of depth and dimension. Usually the way I go about it is I start shading the darkest area first. So I always start with the shadows, and then gradually I lighten the shading, so make it a bit more subtle, and I then move towards the lighter areas and add some highlights. So let me demonstrate for you guys. I'm still on the same layer, I'm still using the sharp chalk brush. Here all I'm going to do is literally try and define the shape and add more volume to it by adding some shadows. So erasing is actually what's going to create the shadow. So make sure you're using the same brush, and you can lower the opacity a little bit so it's not too prominent at the start. So again, I'm using the same light movement and just gradually adding some shadow. And with this one, I'm actually not worrying about any light source or anything. I'm just literally just keeping it flowing. And as you can see, I forgot to hide the stamp. So the stamp that we had at the start, I'm just gonna hide it. It should be on a separate layer. We don't need it anymore. Okay, so you can see I'm like using the same movement, the same direction of the curl, trying to literally add some lines, so it's really going to add depth to it. And again, there is no right or wrong. It's really going to be your shape that's going to dictate where you're going to place the lines. So whatever you've drawn, it should work. You just follow the flow of your shape. And I like to add multiple lines like that, so it looks like it's some type of leaves. And I like to add, whenever I have this type of curl here, add a bit of more shadow on one side, like that, and then gonna add a bit less on the other side. Hopefully that makes sense. Like I said, if you're doing this for the first time, please make sure you try and replicate exactly what I'm doing. It's just gonna make the whole process a lot easier for the first time. And then once you get the hang of it, you can start playing, experimenting with your own. I really love this brush because it's the fact that it's a bit angled really helps you create those very organic lines, going from thick to thin. It's already looking a lot better, a lot more realistic. And of course, if you've erased too much, just grab your chalk again, your normal brush, and just add more color back into your work. So as you can see, there is no right or wrong. I'm just literally just adding some lines, and it's just magically coming to life on its own. And I'm pretty sure that if you guys are doing this, even though you're following the same step as mine, yours is probably going to look different. Like, no matter how hard you try, no matter how hard I try to do the same filigree, they're always going to be looking a little bit different each time. But that's the magic of the filigrees. Alright, so this is what I have got so far at this stage. So as you can see, I literally just used the eraser brush to do this, which I think is looking pretty cool. Now, what I like to do in this type of artwork that is trying to emulate chalk lettering is to add some highlights. So I like to try and brighten some areas. So in order to do that, I think the best way that has worked for me is to actually lower the opacity of this layer. At the moment, it is set to maximum, but if I lower the opacity to say 80%, something like that, it's still looking the same. It's not too much of a difference. But if you then create a new layer on top and then change the blending mode of that top layer to add, then we can add some highlights and make some areas pop even more. Of course, guys, make sure you activate the drawing assist so you're drawing the highlights on both sides at the same time. So let me show you what I mean. There you go. So you can see it's just adding even more volume, because some of the parts are going to look like they're higher up on the screen, and it just makes the whole thing pop even more. So that's my little trick for you guys. So here, same thing, might lower the opacity so it's not so vibrant. Perfect. So that's my trick, guys. You add some highlights at the end by lowering the opacity of your layer and just creating another layer on top using the add blending mode, and that should create a very cool effect. So obviously I'm only just highlighting the parts that don't have any shadows on them, so just a lighter area, and that should really give you this nice 3D look, like this depth and dimension. That's very cool. Love it. So this is how I draw filigrees, guys. Like I said, could spend hours doing this because it's a lot of back and forth, refining, adding more highlights, adding more shadow. Like, you can always go back and forth with that. Like, it's an ongoing process. But also that could work with any colors. Like, you don't have to just stick to black and white. You don't have to stick to a chalk brush. You could use any brush, any color, and it will still work. But basically that's how it's done. You just create your frame, your shape, you add the outlines, so you define the actual outline of the shape, and then you add the shadows and then the highlights. And this is what it looks like. And if you've done everything correctly, you should have 2 filigrees already done for you, and that's how I drew the filigrees in this artwork. A few extra notes, guys. In my artwork, you can see that the filigree is a lot darker just because I've added a lot more shadows, and I've also kept the opacity a bit lower for this one, so I didn't add too many highlights, and the reason was because I wanted the lettering to stand out. So those letters, I wanted them to be a lot brighter than the filigrees, but this is exactly how I drew all of those filigrees. And I wanted to give you a few additional tips as well, guys, to draw your filigrees. So like I said in the video, please feel free to use reference photos. You do not need to draw from imagination to draw filigrees. I think there's so many beautiful examples out there of filigrees available online and in books and in many places, and I think studying reference photos can really help you get a better understanding of the different types of filigrees and how they're drawn, because obviously there's so many different types and so many different ways you can draw them. And also, second tip would be to start simple. If you're new to drawing filigrees, like I said, the best is to start with something very simple and also practice by recreating existing filigrees first. So if you are still new to this, I would recommend replicating exactly the same as what you've seen in this video, trying to redo exactly what I've done. Once you've mastered the basics, then you can move on to more complex design where you have filigrees that are kind of like overlapping and a lot more complex. And then my last tip, guys, is to be patient. Drawing filigrees takes time and practice, so please don't feel discouraged if your first attempt doesn't turn out perfectly. Just keep practicing and you will eventually see the improvements. Hope this tutorial has inspired you to try your hand at drawing intricate filigrees in Procreate. Remember, practice makes perfect, so don't be discouraged if your first attempt don't turn out exactly how you envisioned. So keep experimenting, keep exploring and refining your skills. And if you want to take your filigree art to the next level, consider checking out my online courses like my chalk lettering masterclass or my vintage lettering tutorial, where I dive deeper into advanced techniques and provide step-by-step guidance. Thank you so much for watching, and I cannot wait to see the beautiful filigree designs you create. So don't forget to tag me if you try this tutorial. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you guys in my next video.